Mrs. Toussaint had organized the third grade class into tables of 4. And I was put at a table with Tanya, Clark, and Marcus. I knew Tanya, her father ran his own construction business, and the school bus stopped in front of it to pick her up every day. She was very smart, she had thick blonde hair, and she wore lots and lots of pink. Clark had close cropped strawberry blonde hair that curled neatly on his head. He had bright blue eyes and a smatter of freckles across his nose. He was tall, and at 8, he already had shoulders like a quarterback. Marcus was pudgier. He had shaggy brown hair and beautiful green eyes, and in my mind's eye, he always wore plaid shirts. Now, a month after school started, the 4 of us became the IT table. We had the best reading scores. We aced the most math and spelling tests. We were the one table that didn't get lice. And the more we got to know each other, we would have these amazing conversations for 8-year-olds. Like once, I walked in one day, I'm like, did you guys see Scooby-Doo last night? And everybody was like, no. And I was like, oh my God, they went to this farm and there was a scarecrow ghost chasing Shaggy and Scooby. And Fred, Veronica, and Velma, they actually caught the ghost. And it wasn't a ghost at all, but Mr. Freely, a neighboring land developer who wanted the farm. And all of us would be like, whoa. And we would talk about this as if it was so important until class started. One day, we were playing on the playground, and Clark tapped Tanya on the back and ran away. She tried to swipe Marcus, but instead she tagged me. And as I chased them, I realized, in the most innocent way possible, that I loved them. I really loved the 3 of them. Which is why it was surprising when I walked into class a few weeks later. Tanya was absent, dentist appointment. Marcus had brought in a Star Wars toy catalog, and we were flipping through it when Clark pointed at me and said, hey, I'm gonna beat you up. Marcus and I looked up at each other. What? At recess, Clark said, I'm going to beat you, and he pointed at me, up. And I said, you can't beat me up. And as if it wasn't obvious, I said to him, I'm a girl. Boys beat up girls all the time. Marcus, do you want to beat up Kate at recess? Marcus looked back and forth between us and he said, okay. And at that moment, Mrs. Toussaint started the class. Now, about me, I'm an only child, and we moved around a lot. And 3rd grade was the first time that we'd stayed in a place for more than 1 year. And I know people with siblings, and teasing and wrestling are their own love languages. For me, childhood was peaceful. My mother used to say she could put down art supplies and I'd be busy all day. Not much has changed really, other than maybe the art supplies are also included with wine and Netflix. So, you know, as a kid, the only violence I experienced was getting spanked because I crossed the street when I wasn't supposed to. So this threat of violence scared me. Still, I was hoping like Clark would forget about it. And when we lined up for lunch, I stood at the back and Clark was at the front, and he turned around, he was looking for me, and he went like this to me. At lunch, I sat with girls and I was blanking out. I was wondering what to do. Tell on the people that I loved or get beaten up. And I didn't want either to happen, so I decided I needed to hide. There's no way back into the school from the lunchroom without a teacher, and nowhere to hide on the playground. But there was this thick line of trees that surrounded the back of the school. Now, we weren't supposed to go back there, but I was willing to get in trouble to hide. So I grabbed my tray, ready to dump lunch, when Mrs. Toussaint put her hand on my arm as I walked past. I thought, oh my God, she knows. And I was kind of relieved, but she pointed at my tray and she said, hey, go back and finish that. Tell her, I thought, tell her. And instead I said, I'm not hungry. Half of it then, Mrs. Toussaint said. She pushed me back to the tables. I sat down at the nearest table, I picked apart the sandwich, threw the bits under the table, and then I ran outside. Now, I was the first one on the playground, and I ran to the tree line, ducking behind an oak, and nobody saw me, I was safe. Except recess was 45 minutes long, and I could sit there for probably about 5 minutes before I peered around the trunk of the tree, and immediately I was seen. Hey! It was a recess mom. She's about 20 feet away, and in my mind's eye, she had a cup of coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other. That can't be right, but it was the 1980s, so. What I do remember is the checked out look on her face. You can't be back there. Come on. I thought maybe I was going to have to tell on my friends. So I said, I'm going to get beaten up by Clark and Marcus. Recess mom shook her head. Yeah, you still can't be back there. I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. I'm going to get beaten up. I don't care who gets beaten up. There are rules, come on. Now, I know we're laughing, adult me wants to joke. Was there like a third grade fight club that I didn't know? Was there something else, like with me coming out, that she would protect me? No. And my stomach still sinks thinking about this memory. Because when you're a child, it's a terrible thing to realize an adult won't help you. And it puts all adults into question. And so Mrs. Toussaint would, I sprinted past the recess mom, hating her because Clark and Marcus were probably already on the playground. My new strategy was to see if I could sneak back into the school before the bell. So I was running back when I saw Tanya walking by herself, rubbing her jaw. Tanya, help me, Clark and Marcus are gonna beat me up. And she's still processing what I said when I heard footsteps running up behind us. I started to tremble. I turned and Clark and Marcus stood before us. The people who had been my friends were suddenly menacing and huge. Clark had this nasty smile on his face. Ready, he said. I started to cry, and I think that's what saved me. Clark's smile lost his menace. His freckled face showed surprise and confusion, but then went back to menace. He leaned in towards me, his arm raised, his hand in fist, and when it landed, it was a tap on my shoulder. Tag, he whispered, you're it. And he ran. Had this been a joke all along? Like the only child didn't get it? But I don't think so, because even Marcus looked confused. And then he looked back at me and Tanya, and then he ran. Tanya shrugged and walked backwards and then ran herself. And I think about this moment with adult eyes, and we could talk a lot about this, but maybe the best thing we can do is marvel about how kids process what happens to them in this crazy world, and how we teach each other without adults ever having to intervene. But that's a perspective I didn't have. Instead, I wiped my tears and ran after them because I was it after all. Thank you.